Biennale and also to Alejandro, who is constantly in a position to think through this and define it. And so we'll have a little slightly different kind of format. What I'll do is, rather than pose questions to the presenters, I'll sort of, have a comment, overall comment. And the comments will raise issues to not only to the presenters, but also to Alejandro. And so after the comments, I will, rather than ask the presenters to respond, I will give the mic over to Alejandro and take my comments in whatever way he wants to. And I think he will have interrogations and issues with the presenters themselves. Yes. One thing that was raised with all these presentations was there were fundamental, I think, questioning of the Biennale, which is fantastic. I think you rarely go to a situation where the Biennale is questioned in a very basic philosophical or even methodological way. But one thing that struck me was that while I was saying that, I never questioned throughout the 2 days that we would end up saying, also move to a Biennale. So somehow that never seemed to be an option for this situation. So why did I presume that despite all the 2 days that we will end up saying that we will do it? And somehow we do it because I think we think that something that will be different despite of all the proliferation of the Biennales throughout the world that we've come from. And the sense I got from all the 5 presentations was, I think there was a kind of series of affirmations, negations, and I think everybody will understand why we put Minsuk at the end. Because at the end he was very affirmative about SIBAU and even proceeded to give certain specific ideas about how to proceed. And one way I thought that I could understand all the 5 very different presentations was that we have come to a notion of an ecology of Biennale, and that it is a worldwide phenomenon that even can be traced to larger socio-economic transformation on a global scale, and that the actors involved are, of course, the urban populace, the audience, but also these species of human beings. I love this idea about designers, architects included, being a kind of non-human species, but they are part of this ecology, very intricate part of the ecology, and that, as Beatriz mentioned, we are equipped with new kinds of prosthetics, these humans and non-humans who populate both the city in general and the Biennale of a diverse series of species that sometimes commonly have these new mechanisms. But as Katja also mentioned, that is not always the case, and that the prosthetics might be very different from Manila to Seoul. And so when you think about these Biennale and also the city as an ecology, you talk about agencies, though it has been certainly overused, but at the same time, there were certain fundamental ideas I thought that each presentation had, that had a kind of basis for each presenter's position. Of course, I may be oversimplifying, but with Aaron, I thought it was the idea of experience. That experience was the fundamental key of this, of the Biennale phenomenon. Maybe for Beatriz, it might be spatial structures, organizations. For Mark, which was a fascinating experience to just listen to the flow of the thing, but there was at one moment where you mentioned the word participation. And through the logic of this negation and affirmation, it seemed that the only thing that somebody involved in the Biennale could do is participate as an actor in this ecological system. And so you did use that word. I sort of caught on to that. So there was some fundamental sort of ideas that were running within, from my position, an ecological system. And so the reason we, and then so going back, the reason we do it is because despite of this proliferation of kind of global ecology, the reason we do it is because ecologies differ from place to place. And so Biennale in Seoul, because its systems are different, despite all the common or seemingly common prosthetics, is that Biennale in Seoul has a different ecology from that of Shanghai, Manila, or Oslo, or different places. And so the reason we believe we can intervene and make it a kind of laboratory vis-a-vis some of the fact is that we are sort of actors placed in this given ecology, but at the same time that we can participate, we can change things. And so, for example, Minsuk, in his presentation, had this statement that it's a biennale that is only possible in Seoul. And so there's a kind of affirmation about place that I think is one way to affirm this whole biennale. And so that was the way I sort of listened to everything and to try and sort of gather it together, to present it as an overall issue. And so for me, the question is, if this is an ecology, a global ecology, and that we are actors and participants in different kinds of situations and places, the basic sort of ideas of experience, space, participation, these seems like fundamental ideas that can override the expectations or directions. And I'm not sure whether that is something that we can use or actually work against. Because sometimes these words, experience or even the term laboratory can be misleading. I think that we all want the Biennale to be laboratories, but the way that I think Joseph, the kind of work that you produced as a laboratory, as an experimental product was very different from what Aaron did. And I think I'm really looking forward to starting after that thinking through what will both of you sort of create. And I think that even if we use the common word laboratory, that is what we pursue, that the products will be very, very fundamentally different. And that is why we do this. So so I think there are differences here when we use the word, common word, laboratory or experience or participation. There are fundamental differences that we have to sort out, maybe at a theoretical level or even at a very methodological, instrumental level. So with that, sort of my take on this, I will give the microphone over to Alejandro, and you can take whatever you want from it.
Yeah, I hope that you're not leaving the table also. So, I mean, first of all, I was very impressed with the presentations. I think it was an incredible show of commitment, and in a way, it's also incredible that we haven't had this discussion about biennales yet. Nobody before us has decided to discuss the phenomenon of this type of events. And in this case, it happened for a number of reasons that led us into setting up this conference, in which other people have been involved. And that, in a way, Minsuk said something that was very important for me in the project, which is that he mentioned the intervention of Minuk Im, who is one of the members of the committee that was overviewing the process. And she's an artist, and basically she came one day, and we were all there thinking, oh, great, we're going to do a biennale, etc. She says, is horrible. I would never get involved with a Biennale. So this is an artist, okay? So architects are still hoping that Biennales contribute to something positive things, but artists are already sick of it and they think they're a waste of time and you should concentrate in your studio, doing your work, rather than... and so that basically triggered the whole question of should we do a Biennale, or if we do a Biennale, how should it be? And so on. What I'm going to say it also from the position that I have had in this process, which is a kind of creation of, or is the creation of the institution. So I am saying certain things because I've been put in the position of creating this institution, which is SIBAU, or the team that we were working here were supposed to come up with a structure that would institutionalize things and hopefully making them better than if we didn't have this institution. So the issue of ecology, I mean, I agree with you that every one of you have brought a certain issue that is relevant to an architectural biennale, and then we will have maybe wild differences in terms of what is the percentage of experience versus I don't know, intelligence that should have. But in any case, what led us to make the proposal that we made was this attempt to try to, in a way, correct the ecology. So I don't think that it's enough to say, oh, we're going to go to Seoul and we're going to meet the local ecology and somehow magically this is going to be different. As the institution builders, we were supposed to say, no, we are going to design the institution so that the ecology in Seoul is perhaps not the same as everywhere else. I mean, here we have already 2 serial curators and one and a kind of midwife, some participants. So we know that there is a certain ecology that is no longer local, but it operates globally. And in some ways, what we've tried to do, and there is nothing in a way final. The proposals that we made were in respect to and trying to understand these local ecologies and trying to create something with them that would be better than the simple exploration of supposedly different ecology that happens in Seoul. So in that sense, I would like to mention simply because I think it's almost the antipodes of what we have been thinking. I would like to refer to Aaron's view of the Biennale, which I mean, I had nothing to do. I thought the presentation was fantastic, but in a way, I think that is in the antipodes of what I believe the SIBAU should become. And there are 2 things that I would like to address. One of them is the question that the Biennale should be giving a finger to power, for example, which is very maybe interesting, but in some ways, again, it's something that if you are in the business of defending professionals, it's a little bit what I'm going to say about some of the things that Mark mentioned. You are shooting yourself in the foot if you are trying to sell the Biennale to certain institutions. So I was in the position, and I have to defend that the Biennale is not necessarily about giving a finger to power, but perhaps to be able to redirect power in the right way. And it's that's one of the other points. Then I think that the idea that the Biennale necessarily is not for sale or it's not a talk show, I think is a relatively conventional conventional way of understanding it, and it's the way in which biennales have traditionally happened. I don't think that we should necessarily think that this is the only format that the biennale can have. In fact, I think that everybody was to the Venice Biennale to sell themselves. So there is a certain form of transaction that happens in biennales that I don't think anybody can deny. The question is that you don't get the money directly, but there is an economy there, and I think that maybe the idea that biennales need to be about experience. I agree with you, and this was one of the issues that came up yesterday. I think it's a very important issue, but I think that the experiences, for example, that you have shown today are experiences that I'm not necessarily sure are the only way in which architectural experience can happen. In the sense that it may be that there are, I think that we intuitively think that these things are architectural simply because we have been educated to think that they are architectural, but they are, for example, forgetting to consider some of the things that Beatriz has been talking about, which perhaps cannot be experienced in any of these ways that the installations that you have shown explain. I think architecture is also about carbon embedded, energy embedded in materials, and this is something that is difficult to or weight of elements. So there are aspects of architecture that we don't see, and we don't see, I believe, primarily because we've been educated in understanding that architecture is analyzed in a similar way as other visual arts are. And I think there are specificities to architecture that cannot be so easily associated to sculpture, for example, or to plastic arts. There are other processes that are happening which are in a way missing from what we all understand that is an architectural biennale. And so I'm not sure whether having diagrams versus having installations, either of them are, I think, the only form of an architectural experience.
I will monitor. So now I think. So yes, so Aaron, of course. Sorry. And then we will. So I think it's okay.
Yeah, of course.
No. It feels great.
But okay, I think you can probably all hear me. But it works? Okay. So it's a little bit semantic. I think what you want to do is great. From a polemical viewpoint, I was just saying I'm not sure I would call it Biennale. But let me just point out that I agree with you completely. There are problems with Biennale. There's lots of other ways of doing it. But first of all, what are, I think, the positive elements? And I think it would be worth trying to figure out what the positive elements are and how you can use them. First of all, there is a notion, as Joseph pointed out, of it as a laboratory, as research. And one of the things, when we talk about the proliferation of biennales, and by the way, it's a much larger universe, also of art shows and Christos and things like that. And it's about global tourism, and within that context, it's a rather small phenomenon. It's about World Cup games and stuff like that. So the idea that architecture can have a place in a wider global discussion, I think, is good. The second thing I think is good is the idea of a laboratory, because I think, and Mark mentioned this, to a certain extent, schools and magazines have given that all up. So as magazines disappear, and as schools become teach to the test or teach to the dollar, the notion of experimentation, of thinking, of trying stuff that doesn't get licensed is lost more and more. And so the Biennale becomes a place for whatever this phenomenon is. For me, another essential thing is this, and this is I think where we disagree, is the ephemerality, because I think there's great freedom in ephemerality. And I'm not naive about saying that things not being for sale doesn't mean that they have a commercial value and that they're not part of the system, so to speak. But I do think that the kind of extension of this cocoon that museums and other nonprofit institutions provide, which create a lag time or a moment of deferral of pulling out the credit card. That is a very, very essential lag time. That lag time becomes increasingly important, that moment of disconnect between instant assimilation is of great importance. The notion of it giving the finger, again, rhetorical, but I do think the notion that it offers an alternative, or perhaps we can just think of it as an institutionalization of scenario planning, which is one thing that OMA picked up from Shell Oil in the Netherlands in the 1980s, this notion that you start planning other scenarios. So perhaps I would dial back rhetoric and say that kind of notion of scenario planning, I think, is an interesting role. And finally, again, I would disagree. I think that the notion of presence is important, though I immediately would say with that I think that the points that Mark and Beatriz both raised about the increasing visibility of what it means to be human, as well as of the agency of human beings as technology makes power completely invisible, is profoundly troubling, and we are at the very edge of being able to do anything about that with any kind of physical means. But for me, that's exactly the promise of the Biennale, and I think that's what would be trying to buy a ticket to Istanbul, is to try to figure out whether it's not so much that something is made out of sticks or stones, as that there is, shall we say, an apparition, or there is some way that everything that around us that controls us suddenly reaches, or somehow even for a moment reaches a point that is either an aha moment or a moment of disturbance in the field that allows you to question and get involved with it. That to me remains important. So yes, I love Biennales because I have a lot of fun in them, and maybe I've become very conservative having done one, but I do think there's a certain set of very essential achievements that have become embedded in what we call Biennale that I would love to see you crack out and use in a different way, but I do think that those are worth trying to figure out how to use.
I know that you will respond, but I will like to invite both non-profits or individually to respond to, I think, Aaron's point about us being at the edge of this digital moment. So not only as a follow-up to the presentations, but also as curators of Istanbul, that whether you are actually want to directly deal with this issue, seems you will. The issue of social media.
I was in the process of dealing with it, but of course it's one of my preoccupations clearly right now. But I would say, because I'm a historian, in my current state of incarnation, I am exhibitions in the 20th century have always been laboratories for ideas. This is very important. To establish, you can practically say that the most private experiments of architecture in the 20th century happen in the context of exhibition. Anything from the Barcelona Pavilion, the Global Show, after all, I mean, it's for example, because it was 1929, exactly a year to go around doing turismo, because, the people from Madrid, they go to Barcelona, they have occupations, right? So, an exhibition that was seen by nobody that even knew prominent place in the plan of the exhibition. They didn't see it because they were not prepared to see it. This is not journalists that were against modern architecture. They reported beautifully, this kind of Art Deco pavilion that we don't remember at all. But they probably saw this thing in the corner of their eye in glass and steel, and they didn't know what to make of it, so they went ahead and saw other things. I saw very, very few people saw this pavilion. And this is the second point, that pavilions are always, exhibitions are always biennales and media events, right? And the pavilion in the end, after the exhibition of MoMA, became the most important monument of the 20th century. So a building that nobody has seen, that was dismantled a few months after the inauguration, was declared by all the critics that have written all these histories of modern architecture and have passed by 29 without any problem. In the year 47, they rewrite the edition and say that that pavilion that they didn't see was the most important monument. So a form of virtual architecture that existed in the form of a few photographs perfectly chosen by me for circulation became, in the context of another media event, which is the MoMA exhibition, the most important one. So this, I think, is an example, but there are many other examples from the Spirou pavilion to Mexico to etc. So the exhibition as a site for innovation in architecture, I think, is very well established, and I will agree, I think, with my colleagues, particularly with Aaron, that the Biennale in that sense has that potential, right, at least to... Then the second point, I suppose, is that if Biennales are always media events, we are talking, and we are looking back at the history of exhibition in the 20th century, we are talking about 20th century media. So, of course, photographs and architectural magazines and all these media, even newsreels and films are media from the 20th century. And it happens that we are in a completely different situation. So, whether architectural magazines are dying or are becoming a different animal as a result of a new media, because every new media doesn't destroy the previous media, they kind of, as McLuhan or Le Carré said, makes it very empty. So it's not that architectural magazine has disappeared, it's more that it exists a new form of media that is so prevalent that, when I was having the coffee, I was talking with these people here, cacao talk, I mean, your grandmother is on cacao talk, I mean, you pay things with cacao talk, you talk with your architectural clients with cacao. This is a very important element to consider. If the most interesting architects, I think, of the 20th century were the ones that, on the edge of the new innovations in media, understood it and transformed their operation, I think the most important architects of the anthropologists of the beginning of the 21st century, they will be the ones that understand the new reality that we are living. That is, we are living. That is not to say that there is not a real space, that I don't enjoy going to the Biennales. I am always at the Biennales. I love the Biennales. You see all your friends, you have all these apparel streets, I mean, it's fantastic, right? So they are very efficient things, but the reality is that we are living in this kind of hybrid space, digital and space, and we have it quite account for it. So, for me, in terms of architectural implications, as I say, I think it's as significant as the separation of place and work and place of living. So all these plans that we were so nostalgically referring to even this morning are the sort of this huge transformation in our lives, place of work and place of...
But can you, for example, infer that perhaps the media or the experience that some of the things that Aaron was presenting are becoming obsolete, and there are other medias that now contemporary artists are using more frequently, and therefore we should forget certain types of media. I mean, like the Frank Gehry installation in your Biennale, is that outdated? Should we forget about that?
You asking?
Yeah.
Yes, forget about that. That was not interesting to me. Of course, it may be interesting to him. I think the most interesting still talk about of the 20th century is the one that in a moment of crisis put forward an hypothesis, a theory, right? I mean, you know, we still go to the Stuttgart, demonstrating a new form of living, and by the way, created a neighborhood as well. All the pavilion, you speak about that is they were articulating spatially also a new condition. We were living differently, and as general public also needed to be educated in how do you live in a modern way. And somehow architecture in the context of this one-to-one exhibition became relevant to the general public. That is what is interesting. Because otherwise, you know, with our little kind of professional magazines that are very interesting to our colleagues, but we don't move anything. So the exhibitions are also very important, I think, side for communicating with the wider audience. That's the moment in which architecture in the 20th century has been able to communicate with the...
Would you say, as a historian, that the architecture has a particular type of media that is different to other arts historically, or that there is a kind of blurring of certain media that pervades different forms of manifestation?
It's an interesting.
Because I thought that was your statement was maybe we live in a different media and we need to explore the experiences of these new media.
Exactly, that's what it is. It has consequences even for the city. It has really architectural, urban implications already, whether we want to see it or not. And therefore, for me, that would be an important question to experiment.
It seems that I thought that another issue was temporality in all the presentations. I think Minsuk, in a very, very specific way, talked about the different kinds of temporalities that he had anticipated. And so the issue of ephemeral, it seemed almost that Beatriz, when you were making the point about the Barcelona Pavilion, is that the point was that it was ephemeral, and that because biennales are temporary, that the object suddenly obtains an aura that if it had been built, then that it wouldn't have had. And this, of course, relates to media, because media sort of preserves in a very different way these temporalities. But then again, we say that l'esprit nouveau is because we have a kind of understanding of it that maybe goes beyond this temporality. And so there was, I'm a bit.
It was temporary. It was there for a short time. It was behind a wall. He complained endlessly about the fact that nobody was seeing his pavilion, and nevertheless, everybody saw his pavilion one way or another. I mean, we're still looking at this pavilion. We can draw the pavilion right now.
So it seems like biennales are complicit with media, and that there's a kind of it's almost where you set up this biennale to be fundamentally ephemeral, and then you use media to make it eternal, to exaggerate. And it seems like a mechanism that is on the table right now. I don't know whether this is relevant to, but I think we don't want to set that up. That's not the way we want to set up SIBAU. That's what I think. So the temporality.
I think that's one of the really interesting things about the moment that you're in now, where you kind of have this incredible, almost onslaught of intelligence coming, and all of these ideas being thrown at you, and the possibility of really kind of learning from so many other instances around the world. And really, it's completely open. This is something that really only comes once, because it's, especially in this position of forming an institution, of building an institution, it's actually a huge responsibility. It's something that is an opportunity that will not present itself again. And I think, in a way, even ourselves today, there's been far too little reflection on how different these organizations can be. We kind of tend to get ourselves into this sort of innate conservatism of thinking of the exhibition as something that's kind of an extension of all of the exhibitions that happened before it. And I don't think any of us today, certainly I haven't presented any single, maybe Beatriz is most radical in proposing that simply we look at the way in which what the possibilities that the languages of today offer us. And so I think this is really an incredibly important thing to reflect on, and at the same time to kind of really take into consideration also the question of the agenda of the biennial, which is another thing that I really think we haven't talked about. We've talked about like legacies and finalities and possibilities and so on, but of course an institution of this level that clearly has significant support and that's hosted and organized by the Seoul Metropolitan Government and so on. What's the kind of the bigger picture around this? What are actually the finalities, and how does the biennial as an institution kind of interplay with those, and how is it also a little bit cunning about introducing its own agenda where as opposed to simply becoming kind of an instrument, an extension of an agenda which maybe is larger and maybe which coincides with its own, but maybe it doesn't also. And I think this is also a really important point about the kind of point that Mark was making about the apartment size exhibition that kind of rounds up the whole of the architecture, urbanism, design world, shuffles them over. Everybody kind of introduces their project. Everybody kind of all the world's here. There's spritz is drunk, and everybody returns home. And I think that, of course, that's fantastic. And Aaron made, I think, a really strong case for why the whole idea of the laboratory and the advancement of the kind of legacy, whether or not people actually see it. Because with the kind of experience economy thing, we all want to see it, but nevertheless it kind of gets propagated via social media. I think during the opening days of Chicago, it was just completely mind-blowing how my Instagram feed was just, and that's something you can't build. It's not something you can kind of, it's just like it was Chicago. Everybody I knew was in Chicago at that particular moment. And but beyond that, what exactly is, what are we constructing? What is the kind of institutional, in larger terms, in terms of cultural policy, what exactly is the? I mean, it's important to also think about what we have built and what's possible through the biennial, what's great about it, what the many, its agility, its ability to respond quickly to ideas, to the esprit of its time. But at the same time, also, I think we've also got to remember its kind of tendency to play into a certain neoliberal kind of disarmament of the cultural institution in terms of long-term investment, in terms of the construction of a significant long-term. They're cheap, they're agile, they're disposable. There's no infrastructural investment. It's something that really is the kind of quintessential expression of 21st century cultural policy, which is kind of pay as you go. There's no significant overarching investment going on here. And so in many ways, I think that's also kind of become a little bit my own frustration with the platform, in the sense that it's, even though I've been very fortunate to never be put in a position of having anybody's agenda thrust upon me, and other than kind of very kind of actually enlightening and quite entertaining conversations with presidents of boards who would like the design world to get fixed, and that we need to really kind of figure out how the kind of the way forward for how the world of industrial design is going to be fixed by my exhibition. But beyond that, no real kind of significant pressure in terms of content or anything like that. Of course, discussions, dissatisfactions, and so on. But nevertheless, it is. I think it kind of what it is stifled is a little bit is the possibility of these kind of institutions to operate within the realm of the political, and that's something that I think traditionally the best cultural institutions, the most enlightened cultural institutions, have been very good at doing.
But I think this is one of the most interesting variables in this particular situation, and obviously I'm getting ready to ask for a big budget, and I believe that I mean, I don't know whether you heard yesterday that the success of Korean economy is due to big government control and whatever and a kind of market. I do believe that this city represents an opportunity that probably doesn't exist in Chicago, it doesn't exist in many other biennales where everything happens for free. There's no, everybody just invites people and expects people to, and I'm not saying that here is going to be a lot of money, probably it won't, but I believe that Seoul is prepared to do a more substantial investment in the Biennale than probably you can see in other places. And I think that Minsuk's presentation, when he was outlining already relationships to the Institute of Architecture and all the conversations that we have had, suggests that there is already a tissue of a kind of institutional framework that hopefully will enable this particular Biennale to escape from that kind of cheapness of changing the world with the price of an apartment.
Because you seem to be until yesterday struggling, Alejandro, what to do. So actually, also being aware that there's another ambition of this starting this new institution. But I think it's I cannot present it as a so specific take on Biennale. I think maybe also Aaron can have an experience. So what I'm suggesting is maybe something happens in Rotterdam, NAI, and also Rotterdam Biennale, something that role of questioning, and then the other one maybe is also a curation also happens. And something I think is place like Korea really neat, because we have 4 architecture like KIA, new KIA, many, and then 20 architecture schools, and there are so much traffic in Korea cities, which is shocking. And there's no hub for, and I'm saying it to also Seoul City workers here, because it's very great opportunity to take a good read.
Yeah, I love your idea of having the institute. The one cautionary, let me say 2 things. One cautionary note I would make is, and Alejandro, you and I have had this discussion, and I've been told that the reason why people like me love coming to Seoul, because it's the center of culture and design in Asia, is what everyone in Seoul is sick of. And so making that connection is not right. But on the level of the institution, I would say that especially given the importance of the other design fields, from fashion to graphic design, industrial design in Seoul, and popular culture in general in Seoul, I would make that connection also because I'm a strong believer that it's true urbanism, and we heard a lot of this yesterday, is actually made out of in the artifacts of everyday life, is made perhaps in bed. And so true urbanism comes not from the boxes that we get put in. Who cares how high they are? It comes from the way they are lived and experienced, and that happens at the level of design. So making an institute should not be an institute just for architecture, it should be a design institute that looks at that, and that addresses some of the issues that people like Indy and other people brought up yesterday. But I would also use that reference to make my second point, which is that the same danger of the cheapness of Biennale, which is that they're cheap to do, which means they're cheap to buy, which means they're cheap to appropriate, and they become, as Mark indicated, a kind of escape valve. They become a way to let those architect little dogs play and throw them a bone, and it becomes a way to avoid revolution by blowing off steam. All those kind of things are true, but I think that's also part of a much larger constellation, because by the very notion of architecture becoming a form of experimentation that is about tactical interventions, everything that I'm talking about doing at and trying to do in Shenzhen, what keeps me awake is the notion that exactly because it's so ephemeral and so dependent on social systems that are owned by Facebook, etc., and Baidu and everyone else, that makes them equally easy to be co-opted. And I wish we could have a cross session discussions. That's what I'd love to talk to some of the people, indeed other people from yesterday to now, is how do we prevent that kind of instant acquisition of exactly that which we think is too small, too ephemeral to be bought and sold, whether it's the Biennale or whether it's these kind of tactical interventions. Mark Sonsky has this.
Just a few thoughts. Firstly, I was not advocating bigger budgets, but congratulations if you because more my point was, actually I think usually less money, more ideas. And the question is risk management. So as budgets go up, risk management tactics become more powerful, and so sometimes it's harder to move with big budgets. So I quite like the idea actually of the minimum budget. But more my point was if you are on a minimum budget, then don't pretend to be a consultant because you're not. And if you want to pretend to be a consultant, then you should be paid as such. The question is more like how to take advantage of that moment of going beyond the consultant's role. I should be clear about that. I mean, we are professionals. We are here in our professional role. We are here in Seoul professional. For me, the question is how to use the Biennale, how Seoul can disturb the traditions of the Biennale to be more productive. And I think there are many dimensions of the city of Seoul that are extraordinarily interesting and innovative and unique, which is why we like to be here. And that kind of level of speed, I think time is different here. I remember 8 years ago, which is a long time ago from Seoul. But I remember the teenagers who shop around about midnight because they finish their homework around about 11 and they're shopping for a tactical change in fashion so that they can survive the following day in school. So they really have to be, this is really very, so if we as a field would be operating as intelligently as young people in Korea, we would be each night after 11 grasping a new idea and so on. So it seems to me Seoul's unique history, deep history, and short-term history both have the capacity to tweak the system very productively. I think it can be. I like very much your strategy of really engaging in specific urban questions and being very clear these are being worked on. And all the people involved would be professionals, both on the side of the city, which has a job to do to make a good city, and on the side of the visitors who are asked to participate. All of them, for a moment, have to kind of drop their normal professional activity, which means, in a way, to step up. So my protest against the idea of the consultant is the consultant has a toolbox and it presupposes that the client can say what the problem is, and then the consultant reaches into the toolbox and then writes an invoice. In this situation, you're looking for a situation in which there is no tool yet, and it will require a professional to develop a new tool. Since there is no tool, there is also not exactly the perfect description of what the problem is, so there will not be the normal transaction between professionals. So the sort of temporary space of the Biennale becomes a moment for suspending the normal rules of engagement to make a kind of exchange that's very unclear to both sides, but potentially out of this exchange comes new professional tools, new efficiencies and so on, and on the side of the city a kind of new self-understanding. And I think so. If I'm on the side of the city of Seoul, I also thought the presentation, the very first session was super interesting, and the sort of self-understanding is very deep. But probably there are some kind of statistics that are not there because we haven't thought that way yet. So when I'm listening to Beatriz's presentation, I'm thinking that there may be another kind of statistics that becomes possible. So that will be the first point. The second point about this ephemeral thing, because and which is also about time. Because of course we, as architects, we are always imagining that architecture is somehow not ephemeral. And even that architecture has had a cultural responsibility, both in the East and the West, to construct an image of stability. No matter what that means, stability is 300 years or 1 year or whatever. So we see ourselves as in the business of stability. So anything ephemeral looks foreign to architecture. But of course, why are we asked to make images of stability? Because nothing in our universe is still. Nothing is permanent. So we do a very strange cultural activity, which is produce images that lack movement, precisely because everybody, ourselves included, know that everything is moving. So in a way, what is finally very ephemeral are these images of stillness. These are so architecture is so beautiful because it is so fragile. To make an image of a building, we saw the beautiful shrine that was actually a rebuilt shrine because the first one was lost to the fire, but even the original shrine was growing. So basically, we go there to look at this image of stillness, which is an extraordinarily fragile cultural artifact. So I think if you see architects as producing these very fragile images of permanence, and what it means permanent is always changing with changes of technology, then the new media situation that Beatriz is describing is not a revolution of architecture, it's just an adjustment of the context within which permanence will arrive. And which leads to the question of time. Sorry for the speech. It seems to me time is experienced always, all the times. So if in the Snapchat 10 seconds is the end, it's over. But then we are also a little bit at this moment thinking that the planet is over. So for 200,000 years we now understand that the human species has placed the planet at risk. So simultaneously, 10 seconds is long, and 200,000 years is short, like Anthropocene, maybe at the end. And I think what it means to live is to experience this. So basically in Seoul, you experience the 2 seconds, the 10 seconds, you experience the speed. You see where are the televisions coming from that are everywhere, but not by accident. Your first image was Sensor, the video screen. And you see a temple of 400 years, and you're thinking at the same time about the planet. Then you're saying, which kind of role can the designer play in this adjustment? And just to finish the long speech, we were living in the invisible world of media for a long time, but just to say the least. 20th century was the century of radio. Cell phone, 1983. Social media, 2000. You know, but it's an extended history of architecture suspended within the electromagnetic spectrum. And so I think, again, I'm just saying the same thing again and again and again. If a certain kind of fragility is what the architect is working for, this is strangely what we have to offer a city. It's this I think the cities can go perfectly well without us. I love it, well, cities are too important for us. But what the city might not be able to provide for itself is this kind of mirror image, this reflection of our own fragility. Of course, this fragility is fragility of our family and our subject and our person. And it's a terribly long speech, but this is a very practical matter. This is not a romantic matter. This is a serious matter of how we occupy cities and how we represent them to ourselves and how we live in them. But it's not problem-based. It's not like there's a problem, we have a solution. It's an opportunity for a kind of radical creativity. And as far as I can see, you guys have engineered the conditions for that.
Well, we are. I wanted to. Yeah.
So we are sort of. So Alejandro, can you also wrap things up? And
no, soon has to wrap himself.
The comment that you will make will sort of make the session a little more open, so that any kind of overly provocative that.
No, I mean, I'm actually playing the role of the kind of institution builder, and these guys are playing the role of the naughty guys and girls who are saying, hey, but but I mean, the question of the rules of engagement, I think, is related also to the question of I wouldn't say the budget, because I mean, it's not really budget. We know that the budget of any of these things is ever going to be like MIPIM. You know, I've been exiting MIPIM. When you go to MIPIM, you get paid properly like a consultant. In an architecture biennale, you would never get paid properly. We know that. But I'm talking about engagement and institutional commitment. And I think that the idea of taking the biennale, this is one of the critiques that I have to. I mean, you said, okay, the objective of the biennale is to put something out there that transcends the place, and that is true. That's basically what we all want to do. We want to generate here or in Venice or somewhere else something that goes out there and becomes some sort of predominant idea. Nevertheless, in order to make that possible, I think that you need to seek, or let's say the bet that we are putting on the table is that you're going to need to seek a certain level of local engagement in order to do that. And that engagement cannot be just, hey, I'm here, I'm joining the ecology, and something is going to happen. No, what we are trying to do with the institution building plan is precisely to see how we can engage the Biennale so that we are not in a situation where we have to ask everybody to come for free but where there is a substructure, which is I thought that what Minsuk did was very useful, because he obviously knows what is the situation here, he knows what are the resources, and he knows that if we want this to last, we need to build a solid structure. And so that local engagement is what has led us into say, we cannot be any longer the clog in the wheel. And that's my other concern about when you say, oh, you should not be consultants. As the institution builder, I say, well, if we are going to be systematically the clog in the wheel, if we are going to depict ourselves as the people who do not necessarily do best practices, who do not necessarily know what to say about the city, because we have accepted that our interventions are ephemeral and we cannot comprehend the complexity of the city. We cannot say anything about design. Then we are going to remain the clog in the wheel, and we are going to lose the possibility of a local engagement and a serious engagement.
But I know you're reverent, but that's not what I'm saying. Right? We can describe the city, we can operate, we can design. We have a lot to offer. We are professionals. That's what I mean. We are professionals. We don't say we couldn't do it. What we say is together we could get higher level to the next best practice.
Exactly.
So we would generate best practices rather than deploy them. And this can only happen with testing. That's what I like about the proposal. It's only a laboratory if you test something. And you can only test it if you are in an engagement with the reality of the city and the reality of the people who are taking care of the city. So if they're generous enough to say, we together with you, we will test some of your proto best practice procedures. We do so in the name of professionalism, not as an application of professionalism. We say, we are so good at what we do, we're so good, that for the course of this experiment, we will not deploy our normal skills. And we could easily persuade each other, perfectly, for how brilliant we are. But for a moment, we agree to see if there's something even better. Because we are selfish also, we would like to go home stronger. Because the city is selfish, also would like to go home with some new abilities to engage. This will be my ground. It's almost like arrogance of professional skill rather than